You think that engine lift will obey your every whim just because you flex at it? Her voice hissed against the gloom of the derelict docking bay, a curious accent coloring her sharp tone. He paused mid-haul, muscles burning, every sinew in his arms caught in the punishing clamp of the loaded rig. The woman, or alien, rather, stood at the edge of the flickering overhead light. She was tall, luminous in places where her skin seemed to shimmer with an opalescent cast. Her eyes held a cunning gleam, and there was a faint, throbbing glow at her throat, almost like a living necklace pulsing with her heartbeat. He had never seen anything so mesmerizing. Or so infuriating. He tightened his grip on the rig's handles. A swirl of dust rose around his boots, caught in the stale aftertaste of recycled air. You offering to help, or just pointing out I'm an idiot? He grunted as he tried to keep the rig balanced. The heavy hulk of a machine threatened to tip forward and crush his toes. She stepped closer, and for a moment he forgot about the punishing weight. She had a silhouette like a dancer's, all long lines and coiling grace. A ridge of gently phosphorescent scales gleamed along her arms, leading up to her shoulders where they vanished beneath a band of worn leather that served as something like a harness. That harness also clung around her torso, exposing the side of her ribcage in a brazen, pragmatic style that made him swallow. He could see the shift of lean muscle beneath her alien skin, a quiet promise of power. She cocked her head, black-lashed eyes narrowing on him. I'm saying, she continued in that slightly musical voice, that you'll shatter your spine if you keep leveraging the rig like that. He gave a short laugh. Not the first time I've risked a bone or two. Now, are you going to just hover there, or will you actually help me get this thing locked into place? His arms trembled with the effort. The cargo hold around them stank of old coolant. Flickering neon from a failing sign above danced over a row of rusted crates, the gloom broken only by this faulty overhead fixture. She sighed, stepping forward, the faint glow along her collar and wrists pulsing as if responding to some emotional surge. Without another word, she slid her palms over his hands. Her skin felt warm, a living hum of energy that startled him for a moment. He tried not to react, but she arched a brow, noticing how he stiffened at her touch. Before he could protest, she pressed her body alongside his, using her hip and shoulder to take part of the rig's weight. Suddenly the strain in his arms lessened, and he exhaled in relief. You're strong, he muttered, flicking a surprised glance at her slender form. Stronger than you think, she retorted. The rig shifted in their shared grip, squealing in protest as they maneuvered it onto the docking clamp. When the lock engaged with a clunk, the tension in his shoulders melted. He let go, shaking out his aching arms. She surveyed the battered piece of equipment. His old clunker of a ship needed the new engine coils so they could leave the outposts before nightfall. If the local storm cycles had anything to say about it, the place would be crawling with scavengers soon enough. He wiped the back of his hand across his forehead, and then realized how her gaze traveled down his arms, lingering on the sweat-slick muscles. A slight smirk curved her lips. He felt his face heat, uncertain whether to read her expression as mockery or fascination. Thanks, he said, trying to bury the awkwardness. He quickly busied himself verifying that the clamp was secure, focusing on flicking the old console's panel to ensure everything calibrated. She stepped around him, skimming her fingertips across the side of the rig as though it were a living creature. If you plan on taking flight in that hunk of human scrap, you'd better know what you're doing. She turned her head, and the overhead light caught the sharp planes of her cheeks. The faint prismatic sheen of her scales made her eyes glimmer. What's your name, anyway? He hesitated, scanning her face for hidden traps. She was definitely not from around here. He still didn't know her species. He had been drifting through the border systems for months, living off side jobs and salvage, never staying anywhere long enough to become noteworthy. But the moment he glimpsed her on that rust-red concourse, all his instincts had sharpened, an inexplicable tug guiding him to let her join him on this job. He finally cleared his throat. Kato, he said, offering the only name he'd answered to for years now. Her lips parted as she tested the sound. Kato, she echoed, a subtle purr in her accent. She paced around him again, the harness straps hugging her chest in a way that made it difficult to keep his eyes up. "I'm serious." She inclined her head, crossing one arm over her stomach, her posture an elegant half-bow that reminded him of a formal greeting. Then the moment snapped. She regarded the dull, battered cargo bay with mild contempt. "This place is a tomb. Why stay? Let's get your engine coil installed and off this rock," he huffed, gesturing at the tangle of cables and half-burnt fuses. "It's not exactly a quick fix, Princess. We'll need to route new lines into the ship's core. But I get the sense you're in a hurry, so you can help." He lifted an eyebrow, testing her reaction. She made a show of rolling her shoulders, the little filaments that traced her collar glowing faintly brighter. "If I help, maybe you'll survive the jump. Then you can repay the favor." He recognized the sharp flicker in her gaze, the promise of something she wasn't quite saying aloud. He felt a strange frisson of excitement dancing up his spine. "Fair enough," he said. While he knelt to pry open a panel, she crouched beside him, close enough that he caught a swirl of her scent, something like ozone spiked with a sweeter, earthy note. She extended a slender tool from a belt at her hip, pressed a switch, and an arc of electric blue sparks jumped from it. "Does your species always go about repairs in the dark?" she asked. She flicked the device upward, and a small orb of light hovered above them, illuminating the crooked metal corridors of the ship's belly. He blinked, impressed despite himself. "That's a new trick. Handy piece of tech." The orb threw dancing shadows across her scales, highlighting the pattern that curved around her throat. She nodded. "In my cluster, we call it an echo-lantern. Looks like your translator chip is finally picking up some of my words. Convenient." She reached into the open panel, small arcs of bioluminescent energy jumping from her fingertips. He watched in fascination as wires came to life under her graceful manipulations. "This coil isn't standard. Where'd you get it?" he snorted. "Scavenged it from a junker on the outskirts. Surprised it's compatible, to be honest." She gave him a sidelong look. "You're playing with dangerous scraps, Kato." Her voice turned low. "If it's from the junker I suspect, that means you probably stole it out from under one of the local cartels. They're not gentle about reclaiming property." He shrugged, ignoring the small stab of concern in his gut. "I figure we'll be long gone before they notice it's missing." She was silent for a moment, focusing on the lines she soldered together. Then she asked, "What are you running from?" He stiffened, nearly dropping the spool of wire he held. "Who says I'm running from anything? No one drifts through the border systems by choice, picking up side jobs and half-dead outposts, unless they're on the run." Her eyes pinned him, unwavering. "We all have ghosts to outrun." He bit the inside of his cheek, trying not to let the frustration or old hurt show on his face. "I have my reasons," he said, voice tight. He turned back to the rig, fiddling with a bolt. She didn't press. Instead, she sealed the connection. A soft hum rippled through the coil as the engine snapped to life. He felt a subtle surge of excitement. It actually worked. Cirrus stood and wiped her hands on a rag. "That should hold for now. You'll want to replace it with something more stable once we reach a real station. But it'll get you off this barren rock." She pressed a button on the rig's side. Slowly, the ship's overhead lights brightened, humming back to partial operation. The battered interior of the cargo bay looked slightly less bleak in the new glow. She cast a glance at him, that smirk returning. "I assume you have a pilot's seat here somewhere? Cockpit's above. Follow me." He led her out of the cargo hold, boot steps echoing on the grated metal walkway. She moved with a near-silent step behind him, and he was suddenly painfully aware that they were alone, sealed in a cramped corridor. They reached a small ladder that led up 2 levels. He climbed first, feeling her presence close beneath him. Heat rose to his face at the thought of her vantage point. He swore he could feel her gaze drifting across the muscles of his back. His heart thudded louder than it should have. When they reached the top, the cockpit spread out in a wedge of tinted glass that gave a partial view of the dusty outpost outside. The planet's sky was a sickly yellow-green, swirling with wind-blown grit. A tangle of rusted scaffolding stretched in every direction, dotted with ramshackle structures that looked on the verge of collapse. Here in the pilot's chair, everything felt quiet except for the hum of the newly installed coil. He settled into the seat, checking readouts. Behind him, Cirrus leaned over his shoulder, so close he felt the warmth radiating from her. The harness straps on her chest brushed against his arm, and he swallowed. "Looks like we're in business," he said. "Engines show nominal power. Enough thrust to break Atmo. The rest of the systems are questionable, but just get us airborne. I'd rather not wait around for your cartel friends to show up," she said. Her voice was less cutting now, as though some tension had eased in her. She propped her hip on the edge of the console, crossing her arms. "Time you show me if that muscle is good for anything beyond flexing." He snorted, refusing to let her jibe rattle him. "Strap in. If this bucket tears itself apart in orbit, you'll regret not having a seatbelt." She looked amused. "I've survived worse." But she complied, sliding into the co-pilot's seat. Her body language made it clear she was comfortable with danger, and that only sharpened the attraction that simmered low in his gut. He initiated the startup sequence, flipping switches along the console. The engines roared to life, a guttural rumble that made the entire hull vibrate. Dust rolled off the catwalk in thick clouds, and some overhead fixtures gave a flickering protest. He engaged the thrusters, feeling the tug of inertia as the landing struts groaned, releasing from the pitted deck. A swirl of debris spun outside the cockpit window as they lifted. Cirrus watched him steadily, that faint glow in her collar pulsing in time with her calm breaths. He tried not to stare, but the subtle patterns shifting in her skin were mesmerizing. The ship rose through the swirling grit, outpost buildings shrinking below them. He pushed the throttle, letting the engine coils spool up to full burn. They rattled upward, the battered hull protesting, but it held. Then they burst through the swirling dust clouds into the open skies. The star's light cut through the tinted cockpit glass, bathing Cirrus in gold. He caught his breath. She was half-turned, watching the transition from gloom to pale atmosphere, her expression unguarded for the first time. A softness touched her sharp features. Kato forced his gaze back to the controls. His heartbeat still drummed loud. "We're clearing the atmosphere. Should be a smooth ride from here, but I might have to shift power around if the coil starts to overheat." Cirrus tore her eyes from the view, fixing him with a steady look. "You do that. And once we're safely in orbit, we need to talk about the job." "What job?" he asked, suspicious. She gave a slow, knowing smile. "I assume you didn't think all that effort was just to get me off planet. I want you to fly me somewhere. I need a pilot." He frowned. "Look, I was looking for a quick repair, not a new passenger." But the old tension in him stirred. He had a hunch that, for reasons he couldn't define, her presence might be exactly what he needed. Or maybe she was dangerous. Possibly both. She read the conflict in his face. "If you want your coil to keep working, you'll keep me around," she said. "Because if you run off without me, I can disrupt the lines I just installed and watch your precious rig short-circuit." He studied her. She was half-teasing, but there was an edge of seriousness in her tone. "You're blackmailing me into giving you a ride?" She shrugged. "If you want to call it that. Or call it an arrangement." Her gaze slipped to his arms again, lingering in a way that made his stomach do a slow flip. "Besides, it might be fun." He couldn't help a short laugh. "Yeah, because I was hoping for more excitement in my life." But he couldn't deny the flicker of intrigue sparking in his chest. "Fine. Let's stabilize in low orbit, then you can tell me where we're headed. After that, we might negotiate your fare." The corner of her mouth curved. "Oh, I suspect we'll come to some understanding. I'm quite good at reading humans." She leaned over, flipping a toggle on the console, stabilizing the ship's inertial dampeners. He realized she was more tech-savvy than he initially assumed. Possibly more cunning as well. They reached the cusp of orbit, the planet's curve spreading below in a swirl of pale clouds over a cracked ochre surface. He let out a breath, setting the autopilot. Then he twisted to face her. She had unbuckled and stood with her weight balanced lightly on the balls of her feet. The harness across her chest caught the overhead lights, and he noticed how the shapes of her body were both alien and tantalizingly familiar. A trace of adrenaline still coursed through him. "We're stable. Now talk." She studied him, arms folded. "I need to get to the Carthus ruin in the next sector," she said. "It's an old outpost from my people. There's something valuable there. Something that belongs to my clan. I have to retrieve it before certain others do." He drummed his fingers on the console. "You want me to risk flying you to some ancient site, probably crawling with who knows what, so you can pick up a trinket?" "It's no trinket," she said, the faint glow along her collar intensifying. "It's a reliquary that holds the essence of our elder line. It's crucial to my people's future. Especially mine." A flicker of pain crossed her features, so brief he might have imagined it. "If it falls into the wrong hands, I'm not the only one who loses." He considered, noticing how her posture bristled with tension. This mission clearly mattered deeply to her. He rubbed at his jaw. "I'm not opposed to treasure hunts, but I'd like some pay. I'm not running a charity." She arched a brow. "You want credits? I can get credits. My clan still has some resources. And if you want something else, I can negotiate." Her gaze flicked over his arms again in a way that made his breath hitch. He coughed, trying to keep his tone level. "Credits are fine. Let's keep it professional." "Professional," she repeated, and there was a mocking tilt to her lips. "All right. So we have a deal?" He nodded slowly. "We have a deal." Her responding smile held a dangerous allure. He wondered if he was stepping into a quagmire far bigger than an old ruin. But something in him craved the risk. He extended his hand. She took it, her skin warm. For a moment, neither of them let go. Then she squeezed gently. "I'll show you the coordinates. Set a course. The sooner we reach Carthus, the better. My people have traditions about entering the ruin. I'll explain on the way." He exhaled, pulling his hand free. "Sure. Plot it in." He swiveled to the NAV console, and she pressed a few glyphs that flared across the screen. Strange symbols appeared, apparently the location. The autopilot whirred to life, aligning the ship's trajectory. He checked the readouts. "We're set. Might take a few hours in FTL." She looked thoughtful. "Then we have time." He glanced up at her. "Time for what?" An almost playful gleam sparked in her eyes. "Time for you to show me around this heap. Maybe find out what kind of man I've decided to travel with." She pivoted on her heel, moving into the corridor with a languid grace. He was left in the cockpit, hard hammering, wondering how a day that started with a simple salvage job had led to this. Cato found himself trailing her deeper into the ship's corridors, the overhead lights flickering uncertainly. He forced his gaze off the subtle sway of her hips. Instead, he tried to read the lines of her body for signs of weaponry. She must have hidden knives or something. But the harness didn't reveal much, aside from a small satchel on her belt. Her presence flooded his senses, the faint glimmer on her arms illuminating the cramped space. She brushed her fingertips across walls as she walked, seemingly curious about the place. They ended in the mess hall, a tiny chamber near the center of the ship. A single table bolted to the floor, a row of battered cabinets, and a flickering overhead lamp. She wrinkled her nose. "Cozy." He half smiled. "It's not pretty, but it keeps me breathing between stops." He rummaged in a compartment for a small canister of water, cracked it open, and offered it to her. She studied it warily. "It's purified," he said, rolling his eyes. "I promise I'm not trying to poison you." She took it, sniffed, then sipped. A small smile touched her lips. "We share the same necessity, at least." A drip of water clung to her mouth, and he had the sudden urge to wipe it away with his thumb. He shook the thought off. "How many of your kind roam around these sectors?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "Don't think I've ever seen scales that glow before." She lowered the canister. "Not many. My cluster used to be larger, centuries ago. But war, diaspora, typical tragedies of galactic expansions." She shrugged, the glimmer at her throat pulsing. I wander because my clan is scattered. I'm trying to piece together what remains. He noted the flicker of vulnerability in her tone, but she masked it quickly. His chest tightened with a pang of unexpected empathy. Must be hard, he said quietly, surprising himself at the gentleness in his voice. She frowned as if trying to keep up her barrier. We survive however we can. Then, wanting to shift the topic, she pointed at his arms. And you? You bear scars that don't all come from working on ship engines. He glanced down, noting the faded lines across his forearms. Relics of battles he rarely spoke of. I was in the colonial force once, he admitted. Did some things I'm not proud of. Left before they could brand me anything worse than a deserter. He let out a slow breath. Been drifting since. She studied him for a long moment, her gaze softer than he expected. War never leaves those who tasted its cruelty. My clan knows that intimately. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken things. She took another sip of water, then set the container aside. He busied himself checking a nearby display that showed the FTL drive status. The readout hovered around 50% spool. They'd be in jump soon, which meant the entire ship would shudder with the shift. He braced himself. Take a seat, he told her. The first time you jump in this rust bucket you might. His words cut off as a sudden jolt rocked the ship. The overhead lights sparked, and a grinding noise reverberated from below decks. He swore under his breath. That coil better not be overheating. Stay here. He dashed out of the mess hall, hurrying down the corridor to the engineering station. The moment he arrived, acrid smoke stung his nostrils. He yanked open a panel, coughing as a swirl of sparks danced around him. Damn it, he growled, trying to spot the short. He reached for the coil's manual override. Another jolt pitched him against the wall. He heard footsteps behind him. I told you to stay put, he snapped, but when he turned, Cirrus was already stooping beside him, that same curious tool in her hand. Shut up, she said calmly. Move over. Her fingers glowed with that faint luminescence, and she pressed the tool to a scorched coupling. He saw the arcs of light channel from her hand into the device. For a breathless moment, he felt an odd, static-like sensation dancing across his skin, as though her energy was reaching out to him. Then the coil beeped, stabilizing. He blinked, trying to steady his breathing. What did you just do? She exhaled, retracting the arcs of light into her fingertips. An emergency conduction trick I picked up from my mother's side. We can channel certain kinds of energy. She gave a small shrug, but he could see she was slightly winded. It's enough to stabilize your coil. He studied her a moment, concern edged with awe. Thanks. He pressed the console, verifying the coil's temperature read. It was dropping back into the green range. The vibrations of the ship leveled out. That was close. She wiped a bead of sweat from her brow. Her eyes fluttered shut for a second, then she pushed herself upright, leaning one hand against the corridor wall. Maybe next time, trust me when I say you're dealing with dangerous scraps. He paused, noticing she looked drained. Without thinking, he reached out to steady her, his hand on her elbow. She turned her face toward him, and for a moment neither spoke. She was so close he could see the tiny shimmering flecks in her eyes. Her breath fanned across his cheek, warm and a little ragged. She studied him with that steady intensity that left him unmoved. Why do you insist on risking your life over and over? She asked softly. You don't value yourself, do you? He stiffened, pulling his hand back like her touch had burned him. That's none of your business. Her expression was strangely kind, though her voice held that usual edge. Everything about you is becoming my business, Kato. You realize that, don't you? You're flying me to Karathis, we're entangled now. If we're going to do this, we do it together. She gestured around them as if the ship's beating heart was their shared tether. He swallowed, ignoring the surge of conflicted emotion in his chest. Fine, he muttered. But I'm not used to teaming up. He realized how lame that sounded. His life had been solitary for so long. She simply nodded, that faint glow at her collar pulsing in a slow rhythm. Just let me help when the ship starts trying to kill you. No more pushing me away. She took a step back, swaying slightly, and he reached for her instinctively to keep her from collapsing. You all right? He asked, concern slipping into his tone. She gave a shaky laugh. Channeling raw energy can be tiring for me. I need a moment. Let's go back to the cockpit, make sure we're still on course. She tried to straighten, but her breath was uneven. He nodded, slipping an arm around her waist, ignoring the little flutter in his stomach as her body pressed against his. She smelled like lightning and salt. Her arm draped across his shoulders. You big lug, she murmured, half teasing. I didn't realize your muscles might actually be useful. He rolled his eyes, but he couldn't hide a small smirk as he helped her navigate the short distance back to the cockpit ladder. When they arrived, he eased her into the co-pilot's chair. She settled there, leaning her head back, eyes drifting shut. He checked the readouts, verifying that the FTL spool was continuing. They'd be in jump soon, and after a few hours, they'd exit near Carathis. Barring more malfunctions. Stepping to her side, he rested one hand on the console. You said you could get me credits for this job, he said quietly, partly to fill the silence, partly to ground himself. Think you can keep that promise? She opened her eyes, leveling a long look at him. Yes. And so much more if you'll accept it. Her gaze slid across his body in a way that made his pulse skip. Then she spoke again, more softly. I'm not just an exile. My clan once held a high place among my people. If we recover the reliquary, that might restore our standing. I'll have resources. Enough to pay your weight in precious metals. He gave a low whistle. That's generous. And you're sure you can trust me not to steal it for myself? She laughed, though it was a dry sound. You could try, but you'd fail. The reliquary is bound to my lineage. It won't respond to anyone else. The best you'd get is a worthless husk. She tilted her head. I'm more concerned about who might track us there. This sector is riddled with old slaver rings, pirate clans, corporate raiders. They'd love to get their hands on my clan's relics. He remembered the savage black market auctions he'd seen in the past. We'll have to be careful, he said. But as you can see, I'm not exactly a shining hero. She regarded him closely. Maybe not, but you're not some heartless raider either. Otherwise, you'd have left me on that outpost. Or tried to take advantage. You have a spark of decency, even if you're too bitter to admit it. She closed her eyes again, breathing slow. He didn't reply, unsettled by how accurately she read him. Instead, he turned to watch the viewport. The swirling cosmos spread beyond, speckled with distant stars. His reflection overlaid the starlight, and just beyond that reflection, he saw the faint green shimmer of Sirius's scales. The hush of the cabin pressed in. He found himself acutely aware that they were alone in a cold, vast universe, pinned together by necessity, but something deeper was unfolding. He flexed his hand on the console, forcing himself to focus on the present. There was a job to do, a ruin to explore, and quite possibly a storm of danger lurking ahead. Yet beneath that, an undercurrent of longing stirred in him, a curiosity about her that he hadn't felt for anyone in longer than he cared to admit. He told himself it was simply lust, the novelty of her alien grace, the pull of her mesmerizing glow. But he suspected it was more than that. Every time her eyes met his, he felt a raw chord thrumming in his chest, one that resonated with the same lonely ache he saw in her. He didn't know what shape that connection would take, or if it would crumble under the weight of their secrets. But for the first time in ages, he felt the faintest flicker of hope, tangled with apprehension and that slow-building attraction. And as the ship's drive slid into the smooth lull of faster-than-light travel, Cato wondered if the real journey had nothing to do with star systems or ancient relics, and everything to do with the woman, a warrior, an exile, a survivor, resting in his co-pilot's seat, breathing softly as her luminous body fought off weariness. He could almost feel her heart beating in the quiet, as though it sang with the same restless tune that filled his own chest. He forced himself to look away, focusing on the controls. Because the moment he let that spark of connection engulf him, he wasn't sure he'd ever be the same.